Hello, welcome to CivilNet. My guest today is Manuk Hergnyan. He is a managing partner in EV Consulting and one of the co-authors of the National Competitiveness Report of Armenia 2014. Manuk, thank you for joining us this morning.
Thank you.
I spent the better part of the weekend reading this report that you've prepared. Since 2008, it's an annual report that you prepare every year. And this year it's dedicated to growth imperative and constraints. In the report, you talk about some of the critical challenges that are facing Armenia today. And you also talk about key constraints to economic growth. Can you explain to us what those critical challenges are to start?
Thank you. Probably I'd better start with saying that the report comes at a time when every percentage point of economic growth is very critical for Armenia. And we show that in the report. We show the cost of having a high and sustainable growth rate for the long period of time versus not having that economic growth. And in order to understand what are the key constraints to the growth, we applied a special methodology that was developed by a few Harvard University professors. And by the way, one of those professors, Ricardo Hausmann, wrote a forward preface for the report. And that's the concept is called growth diagnostics. And it focuses on the concept of binding constraints. These are the constraints that, if not removed, other efforts to deal with other constraints, other issues at the economy would not be productive. And we identify 4 such constraints. And those constraints are, first, distorted competitive environment.
Lack of competition in the marketplace.
It's not lack of competition, it's the distorted competitive landscape. It's not necessarily the dominance of monopolies or oligopolies. I would explain a little bit in detail what I mean distorted competitive environment. The second is the lack of new economic opportunities or the discovery of new economic opportunities, or what in technical terms is called lack of self-discovery. Third binding constraint is one-dimensional financial system with the dominance of banking system and lack of other financial instruments. And the third one is the low quality of human capital, which is probably one of the fundamental constraints we have in the economy.
Yeah, but when I read that, when I was going through the report, and that particular constraint sort of stopped me in my tracks, because we know that in Armenia we have comparatively to other countries, we have a education rate that's comparatively high. 50% or more of the population has university degrees. So where's the problem there?
Exactly. We have no problem in terms of the quantity or the supply of educated people. You can see in the streets, you can see higher educated people driving taxis. That means that they are not demanded. Their skill sets are not demanded by the economy. The problem goes into the quality of the educational system that supplies, and I think this conclusion is also supported by a few surveys we've done, executive opinion surveys, and the businesses also find that the second key constraint to their growth, after the small market size and lack of market opportunities, is the quality of workforce they can hire in the local market.
If we look at it, for a number of years, our government, the prime minister of the country, has said that Armenia will become the IT center of the region. And yet when you talk to companies in the IT sector, they will often say that, yes, there's a very small pool of people. They don't know how to catch those employees. And then we might have 1,000 lawyers, but we really only need 50. Or we might have 500 doctors when we only need 100. So education, government policy, economic policy, these all have to work with each other, no? I mean, so that when they're going to be accepting students into particular programs, they limit the number of students, and whereas they open up spaces in those areas where the economy needs that workforce.
Exactly, that's the key message of our report in this area. I think the structural gap, the difference between what you provide in what especially the education system and what the real economy needs, this needs to be tackled and addressed. The case of IT is very well advertised. Everyone knows that we have lack of IT specialists in the country. But in other areas, you still have the same problem. You have the problems with chief financial officer, you have the problem with good marketing officers, you have a problem with technical specialists. It's widespread, it's across the economy, and no one is talking about that. One of the fundamental reasons of the low productivity, which is by the way, is the key definition of competitiveness, the productivity by which you use your resources, is driven by lower quality of your workforce. And the management systems you employ, our previous competitiveness report was devoted to the issues of management practices of Armenian companies, and the big chunk of our problems is coming from this human capital gap.
For someone who is not an economist, who doesn't understand the business culture, financial markets, capital markets, if they were to look at Armenia's position, geopolitical position, it's a small country, limited resources, blocked by 2 of its 4 neighbors, doesn't have direct access to the sea. It needs to go through the port of Poti if it's going to do sea transportation. A lot of people would see this as non-conducive. They would see this as a barrier to economic potential in the country. How do you see it?
Interestingly, that our analysis showed that transportation constraints are not, we cannot say definitely that these are the binding constraints, at least at this point. We did a lot of analysis, cost comparison with other countries, using multiple indicators, and we can't say for sure that transportation limitations are the binding constraints. They are binding the growth of the Armenian economy at the current stage. So we have other constraints that are much more important at this point than transportation.
Again, we talk about foreign direct investment and even major infrastructure projects. I think the only major infrastructure project that's currently trying to move forward is the North-South Highway that's being funded in part by the Asian Development Bank. Why hasn't Armenia been able to attract more foreign direct investment in the country?
The foreign direct investment attraction model is the current model as exhausted. It has been driven by large infrastructure projects, but that has its limitations. So the country of the size of Armenia, of the geopolitical situation of Armenia, needs to have more aggressive, more active, more proactive foreign direct investment attraction policy, especially that we have such asymmetric resource as diaspora, and diaspora executives working in different international companies and multinational corporations. And I think this has been one of the major drawbacks of Armenia's economic policy.
Right, we haven't capitalized on that incredible network or that incredible power that we have that we call the Armenian diaspora. You know, you mentioned the Harvard professor who had written the preface, and I was reading it this morning. I read things backward, you know, and he was saying that, and we all know that in 2007 the World Bank coined the Armenia as the Caucasian tiger. And yet in 2009, Armenia suffered one of the worst recessions, and our economy contracted by 14.1%. And perhaps one of the reasons for that was because we depended on remittances. We depended on investments from diasporans who came to build residential buildings that are, you used a term, non-reproductive. Non-productive capital. Which leads someone to think that there wasn't diversification in the economy, that we put all of our eggs in one basket, and because times were booming and the global economy was, moving forward, and so was Armenia, but there were other countries who did not suffer such a deep recession because
they were more diversified.
So?
And they were more diversified sources of investment. And in the report, we show also that our domestic savings are very low, and in the recent years, even household savings are negative.
Yeah.
So you don't have resources to transform into the productive capital through financial intermediation, through banking and other institutions. That's why you have to attract foreign savings. In this case, means foreign investment into the country. And that's not only about financial resources, that's about technology transfer. Because one of the key constraints we are highlighting in the report is the lack of new economic opportunities that in the Armenian case is necessarily linked to exports. And our current export structure is very standard.
Non-sophisticated, as you say.
And we export products that are not tightly linked with each other, and they do not allow to develop capabilities to produce other products and services to sell in export markets. In order to fill that gap, you basically what you do two things. You invest in new skill sets, and second, you try to attract companies into the Armenia that export their products outside of Armenia. So basically, these are two areas of policy, and they need a different level of effort.
And vision, maybe?
And vision and execution capabilities.
Why is it that we don't have those?
Oh, that's...
I mean, they're all pretty smart guys. It's not like... For me, it comes down to this. Politics and business are so closely intertwined in Armenia. Business interests, political policy. Is that a problem in Armenia? You know, earlier you mentioned monopolies and oligopolies aren't so much of a barrier. Certainly with a very small, limited domestic market, there will be natural monopolies. If those companies want to compete with foreign markets, they have to be bigger because of and all of that. But is the problem not... I'm sure that they know how a proper economic policy would benefit everybody as opposed to just 5% of the population.
Before going to that, I just wanted to make clear our message about the competitive environment. The distortions in the competitive environment are fundamentally linked to the shadow economy, and distortions are coming from a non-transparency of the corporate sector, and the discriminatory treatment by tax and customs authorities of businesses. Those are critical areas, and unless Armenia ensures more transparent tax and custom systems, the anti-monopoly policies would not be very, very effective.
Sure.
And this comes from the fact of interlinkage between the political and business elites. And basically, there is no such concept as a homogeneous government. The government is a reflection of different power groups and the dynamic equilibrium between them. And that comes to your question about why we're not making that wise choices, right? Because the mentality is very short term, and we don't have a dominant group with a meritocratic kind of social values with a long-term agenda. What we show in the report is that the economic pie is shrinking, and if you are even able to maintain your share in absolute value, it's going to shrink over the course of the time. That's why we propose to reject this zero-sum game mentality and think in terms of the expanding pie mentality, that kind of liberalizing the environment so that the overall economic pie is expanding and everyone benefits. And that's required a little bit courage and long-term thinking.
Right. It's about rule of law. It's about equal and fair access to resources. It's about the law applying to everyone equally, which is something that we've had difficulty with since independence. And again, we were speaking earlier, and perhaps it comes from not having statehood for centuries and not understanding that all of our participation as citizens of the country contribute to the good and benefit of all. Just as a concluding question, because there are many, many things that we could talk about that's contained in the report, and I would encourage our viewers to definitely check it out online, which they can do. We will provide the link so people can go and read it online. It's both in English and in Armenian. And you presented this last week on March 4 to government elite and to the business community and for the media as well. How was it received by the government? Because it is, I would say, a courageous report, because you clearly identify the problem areas, the lack of vision, perhaps the lack of long-term economic policy planning in the country. How was it received?
The Prime Minister said that he agrees with the overall prioritization of key issues of the Armenian economy, although he had some other factors for him more important. However, one of the critical areas, which is the distorted competitive environment, he agreed that this is the core issue and stated even if they're not able to ensure that the government's policy can be considered as failed. So I think this is one of the critical manifests that the report has had already some impact on the thinking, on the agenda. However, it all remains to be seen what actions would follow. Mm-hmm. And as I said, there is no such entity as a homogeneous government entity, and everything would depend on the ability of the political and power elite to come up with more long-term change agenda with the private sector, because the economic system is a very complex system. You can trace everything to just economic policy making. Competitiveness is a consequence of a few macro decisions and the multiple of micro decisions. And these micro decisions by every economic entity, even the store, even the small store, the small shop over there is very critical. And we show that it's not only about economic policy making, it's also about decisions by multiple economic actors. And I have to say that I'm very optimistic about Armenia's economic system, about Armenia's economic future. Maybe there is some element of irrationality in that, but I believe we have so much potential, and some of these potentials comes from our constraints. Our constraints impose a specific course of action. For example, one of the ideas that we try to promote through this report is that education should become a national an idea for national advantage. In this age of globalization and technological advancement and knowledge-based economies, if we are able to create, to make knowledge a centerpiece of all our ambitions, I think that might become a formula for winning.
Well, I must admit that after I read the report over this past weekend, I actually felt optimistic, which is surprising because of the current state of the country, of the current state of the economy. But after reading the report and seeing the suggestions and proposals that you've made, and taking into consideration those 4 constraints that you mentioned that we could eradicate if we had those long-term policies. So I congratulate you on the report. I hope you will continue preparing them and advocating for their implementation with the government of Armenia. So thank you very much, Manuk.
Thank you.
I'd like to remind our viewers that my guest was Manuk Hergnyan. He is the managing partner of EV Consulting that co-authored or that prepared the National Competitiveness Report of Armenia 2014. Stay with CivilNet.